My name is Martin Charles Manin. Today is June 12th, 1995. I was born more than 67 years ago in Boston, Massachusetts on March 18th, 1928 to Sam Manin and Fanny Landers. I wasn't always Martin. As a matter of fact, I grew up as Mel. I went to high school and college as Mel. And it wasn't until I went into the Army that my birth certificate indicated to me that my name was really Martin. To this day, my friends call me Mel, but officially, my name is Martin.
I think my mother did this because after she named us, she decided that she didn't like those names, so she called us something else and forgot to tell us what our real names were.
My mother came here as a young girl from a city in Galicia, which was eastern Poland or western Russia. It was called Lvov, and it's also called Lemberg. Her father was a baker in that city. They immigrated here to Boston, where as a young girl, she met my father, got married, and moved in, and we all moved in with her mother in a nice little house in Dorchester. My mother was the leader of her social set, the Queen Bee, great bridge player, a very attractive lady who, after my father died, married 3 more times and died in 1990 at the age of 85. My father, Sam, grew up in Russia, in a town called Polanoa, which is a small town near Kiev in the Ukraine. His father in Russia was a barrel maker, and his brother Joe came over to this country first, sent the money back to enable my father to come over. My father was apprenticed to a jeweler in Russia, and used to dream about coming to America, where if you went into a restaurant and ordered a cup of tea, you could eat all the sugar you wanted. In Russia, the only sweetening they had was the dregs of a molasses barrel. When he got to this country, he and his brother Joe went into business together, repairing jewelry. Joe was the diamond setter, and Sam was the jeweler. They sat side by side in a small office on Washington Street in the Jewelers Building in Boston. My father was a superb European craftsman. I remember one day watching him do a repair job. He showed it to his brother Joe, who admired it, and then my father said, "Yeah, but what about this spot here?" And my Uncle Joe looked at it with a magnifying loupe and said, "Oh yeah, I see the defect, but nobody will ever see it." But my father said, "I see it," and did the whole job again. My father kept at this job until 1961, when he suddenly came down with an acute hemorrhage, which turned out to be stomach cancer, and he died in March of 1961. Just before my second son was born, and of course Sam was named after my father.
Sam was a delightful, sweet, gentle man, wanted to be left alone to do his thing. Fanny drove everybody crazy. She ran the show, she gave orders, and everybody sort of sitted whenever Fanny was around. Everybody jumped. And she scared the life out of me.
My brother Stanley was born 2 years after me. He was also the victim of a name confusion. He grew up as Stanley, but his birth certificate was recorded as Saul.
She called me Stanley, and my name was Saul, and I didn't find that out till I was almost going into the Army. So I changed my name from Saul to Stanley.
Stanley and I were really very different. I was the studious type. He was more into running around, having fun. But it's interesting as I look back. Over the years, we've come closer and closer in not only looks, but in attitude. When we were children, I always thought that I looked like my mother and that he looked like my father. But as years went by, we began to look more and more alike. And now, when I look in Stanley's face, I almost see myself.
My brother was, I would say, an excellent student from the first grade on, and my parents realized that he had this quality of being a studious person, and they directed him very early in his life to be a doctor, and he took them seriously, and I guess he made it. He's now an orthopedic surgeon. I was saying that my brother and I get along together. He knew how much I wanted to be. He ran up to the clubhouse, and here it is.
And this is to my baby brother. We're growing together more and more as time goes by.
No question. By the time we hit 95, we'll actually be in love.
We'll be twins. Cheers.
In our very early days, up to the time I was about 4 and my brother was 2, we lived with my mother's mother in a nice little house in Dorchester. I only have a very fleeting memory of my mother's mother and of my father's father, as a matter of fact. About the time I was 4, we moved into our own apartment in Dorchester at 65 Wentworth Street. I understand that that house doesn't exist anymore, and the neighborhood has changed a lot. But it was a nice Jewish enclave in the middle of a very Irish part of Boston. We had a nice apartment in a 6-room, in a 6-family house, 2 apartments on a floor, 3-story building with big porches in the front and back. Our house overlooked the local playground and the high school. And if we looked straight down the street out of my front window, I could see our grade school, the Emily A. Fifield School. I remember it well. Growing up on Wentworth Street meant that you had to learn to protect yourself. Living in this Irish enclave, we had very many street fights, but street fights in those days were a lot different than they are now. Bare knuckles only, and the worst that ever happened to anybody was a bloody nose. In those days, I had to go through these Irish neighborhoods to get to my Hebrew school, so that we had lots of opportunities to exchange little fisticuffs. And I guess in those days, I learned to give as good as I received. The house that we bought was in Mattapan, near Mattapan Square. It was on a beautiful street. It was a beautiful single-family house, colonial house. And I remember fondly our early days there when the whole family got together and built a room onto the back of the house with my father as the chief architect. When I was 13, I finally had a chance to go to summer camp because my mother delivered my baby sister, Cookie. Her name was Marilyn, but no one ever called her Marilyn.
And I bet there are more people out there that don't know her name is Marilyn than know and call her Cookie. So she did it to all 3 of her children.
Cookie, who was 13 years younger than me, was almost like my own baby. I treated her like a very, very big brother. And we had a very nice relationship all our years. After grade school, I was lucky enough to passed the entrance examinations to Boston Latin School, where I spent the next 6 years, going from the 7th grade right through the end of high school. At that time, it was probably the best school in the country. I remember it was mandatory for our teachers to assign us a minimum of 3 hours of homework a night, so that when I finally got to college, college was dead cinch. After high school, I would go to Hebrew school. I went to Hebrew school until I was 16. And finally, in my senior year in high school, I decided I'd had enough. I wanted to play football. And I guess that was the first time I ever had to oppose my father, who wanted me to continue. Some of my teachers were great. The one, though, that I think made the greatest impression on me was Doc Roach. He was my Latin teacher in the 9th grade. And he impressed upon us, and upon me, perhaps more than anybody else, that memorization was not the way to learn and to study, but rather it was important to understand what you were doing. Then you would really remember it and understand it and be able to do it at any time. And I did apply this to everything else that I ever did in the rest of my academic life.
Yeah, one of my great recollections of Dad is sitting around the dinner table, and no matter what discussion happened to come up, and no matter what the question was, there was always a napkin and a pen sitting around, and Dad could always somehow illustrate the problem or solution on a napkin. No matter how difficult, it was always somehow consolidated down to a napkin side that could answer any question that was ever posed to mankind.
My father, growing up, I thought he was the smartest guy that I'd ever known. I remember never asking him a question that he didn't know the answer to. He knew the answer to every question, no matter how esoteric it was. And I remember thinking this all the way up through my mid-20s. I was at least 25 before I ever asked him a question that he didn't know the answer to. In the last 10 years or so, I think I have stumped him a couple of times, but I'm telling you, he had a very long streak going there for a while.
After high school, I took a few semesters at BU, and then at that time the war in Europe had just finished, and I enlisted in the Army. It was very important for me to get onto the GI Bill of Rights, which was going to expire soon. So that in 1946, I enlisted in the Army, where I spent the next 15 months. I had the great opportunity to spend the whole year in Japan, in the Army of Occupation. I was stationed at Camp McGill, which was near the Japanese naval base of Yokosuka. We had plenty of opportunities to get into Yokohama and Tokyo. From our camp, we could see Mount Fuji in the background. I remember very well the destruction that we saw in Yokohama. In the Army, as usual, because I had some college background, they decided to put me into the infantry, where I was a foot soldier for a while. I then decided that I'd much rather be in the medics, and got myself transferred to the base hospital as a medic, where I spent the rest of my time much more profitably. After my Army career, I got back to BU, where I finished, and then went to Boston University School of Medicine, where again I commuted every day, but this time from the house on Woodhaven Street in Mattapan. I did very well in medical school, graduated in the upper part of my class, Phi Beta Kappa, Beg Society. It was interesting that until the very last minute, I thought I was going to do cardiology, and then changed my mind and ended up as a general surgery. After a year at the Boston City Hospital, where I did my general surgery, I spent another year of general surgery at the Boston VA Hospital. And while I was there, I decided to switch from general surgery to orthopedic surgery. I was lucky enough to apply for and get a residency at the Hospital for Joint Diseases, and I arrived in New York in 1956. The Hospital for Joint Diseases is in the middle of Harlem, 123rd Street and Madison Avenue. I had a room at the hospital, lived there for the next 3 years. At that time, I was earning $80 a month and trying to run a social life as well as to stay alive. While a resident at the Hospital for Joint Diseases, one of my attendings was Joe Alper. We got very friendly. One day, Joe had to do a case, and I was assisting him at surgery, and he had forgotten to bring the x-rays. He called down to his office and had one of his girls bring the x-rays over to the operating room. The messenger happened to be Marilyn Barish.
And lo and behold, there was a very cute-looking guy in a green scrub suit. Curly. Believe it or not, still had very curly hair. Nice-looking guy.
She was the idealized Jewish-American princess that I was looking for. We dated. I remember she lived in a nice little apartment just off Pelham Parkway, and her mother and father, Sylvia and Maury, watched very carefully, and if we were parked outside, maybe late one night necking, he managed to bring the garbage down.
He parked it right in front of the house. He double parked right underneath the lamppost, directly in front of the house. And that was his spot, I guess because he had MD plates. Mm-hmm. And one night, he and Marilyn came home from a date, and they were necking in Mel's parking spot underneath this streetlight. Well, Murray looks out the window, and he sees them in the car, and he's flabbergasted that the neighbors are going to see them also. So he quickly picks up a bag, and he runs out like he's going to the garbage. And he did that a number of times to try to get them to stop and move. All Mel had to do is just move up the block a little bit, out of line of sight, and he could have necked all night.
He came marching into the house with these very thick ripple-soled shoes, and the house, you have to know, was perfect. It always looked perfect. And every step he took in the house, he was leaving some dog droppings that was stuck in the ripples of his ripple-soled shoes. And so as he walked, my father was following after him, cleaning up the mess.
In those days, as I said, I was kind of broke, making $80 a month, and I had to figure out ways to carry out a courtship on $80 a month. And I more or less knew all the places where we could go for free.
Our very first date was to Lewiston Stadium. That was part of City College, and it was an arena where there was beautiful music played once a week or so in the summer months. You sat on the concrete steps and you listened to beautiful music, and it was free. Mel was a really poor intern, and he always looked to take people out to inexpensive places. And believe me, this was inexpensive. It was beautiful, but inexpensive. And he had so little money, we couldn't even afford the cushion to sit on, because that was 35 cents. Our second date was to Jones Beach.
I think it was because Marilyn wanted to see my legs. And I think after that date, she knew that we were going to get married.
I made a basket full of sandwiches, and we went to Jones Beach. I pretty much liked him a lot by then. When I saw him in a bathing suit, I said, geez, I really think this is the guy for me because he's got great legs.
I thought the courtship progressed very rapidly. Marilyn thought it went too slowly.
It took a long time for him to make up his mind, and my whole family was really quite pissed because here I was ready and I was so terrific. How could this guy not be panting to marry me? But he was taking his time, taking his time.
Of course, it took him a long time to make up his mind, And I got a little bit upset over it because he was acting like he was buying a tremendous property. He wasn't sure. In fact, should I say this? In fact, I thought maybe once I'd draw a financial report on me.
No, that's not so. He wasn't interested in your money.
Huh?
That's not so. I don't think you should say that.
No?
No, that doesn't.
I think so.
Finally, he actually proposed. He proposed to me, and he went to my father like you would in the old days.
Well, I didn't give my permission right away. I was rather reluctant about it because he was just overdoing it.
My father, by this time, was so angry at him because it took him so long to get around to asking me that he looked at him, he said, "You're going to marry her, but if you're not going to make her happy, I'm going to kick you all the way back to Boston."
But things did progress, and we got married in my next to last year of residency, 1958, at the Pelham Parkway Jewish Center. I remember Rabbi Diamond married us there. That night, I remember getting back to our apartment, opening the wedding gifts to see if we had enough cash to go on our honeymoon. Fortunately, there were a few bucks, and we could afford to go on a honeymoon. Not only did Joe Alper introduce me to Marilyn, but invited me to come into practice with him, which I did. We had an office on the Grand Concourse, number 1777. Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet lived in the same building. Grand Concourse at that time was a very lovely street. We stayed there until 1975, when I built my new office building on Gun Hill Road in the Bronx. About the time we moved into our new offices on Gun Hill Road, Joe Alper got very sick. And I remember having to call him aside, and I performed one of the most difficult tasks that I ever did in my life. I had to tell him to stop operating. And after quite a bit of resistance, he finally did. He then died. After we got married, our first apartment was on Walton Avenue in the Bronx. We had a sublet apartment with a Murphy bed and a dumbwaiter. In that apartment, Marilyn was the only one who used the dryer, the automatic dryer. Everybody else used God's dryer up on the roof. After a year there, we moved to a lovely apartment on Pelham Parkway. We paid the exorbitant rent at that time of $185 a month. An unbelievable amount of money for me in those days, for 2 bedrooms and a terrace, 2 baths. Nice apartment. We had a good time there, and we stayed there until we moved up here to New Rochelle in 1966. In December of 1959, Stephen was born. In 1959, on Christmas Day when he was born, it also happened to be the first day of Hanukkah. And that was only the second time in this century that Hanukkah and Christmas coincided. So I personally was sure that Stephen was at least the Messiah. And he still may be. The time will have to tell about that.
My father, he's always been my main man. And I'm telling you, he's got his faults like everyone else does, but you can't tell. I could tell you about him, but if you're an outsider, you can't talk to me about him. If you've got something to say about my father that I don't like, then you're not a friend of mine.
Mel was very thrilled to be a daddy the first time. He was really looking forward to fatherhood. Actually cried the day Stephen was born. Went to Temple to find out the proper way to name him. He was named, Stephen was named after my grandfather Samuel, but since his dad was alive at the time, we named him Stephen. His dad was Sam, and we didn't want to have a Sam at that time. So we named him Stephen Mitchell.
Sam was born on June 23rd, 1961. My father had just died in March of that year. And of course, Sam was named after my father, Sam.
I think one of my enduring recollections of my father growing up is that at night sometimes we wouldn't want to go to sleep and we would make him have an evening chat with us. We would demand that he just come in and just chat about nothing in particular.
But it was always either an evening chat or a game of 20 questions, or on a real special night, maybe a chapter in Mark Twain.
Bringing up two kids at that time was not so easy. During the time that they were growing up in those very early few years, I had to spend a lot of time studying for my orthopedic board examinations.
But he was a young doctor, busy, 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 not around as often as he would have liked to be, nor as often as I would have liked him to be, but was there for almost all the important things in childhood, I think, and for all the good, and all the happy, and all the tough, and all the difficult. But I think we got two good boys.
It was a lot of fun trying to bring up two kids, run a practice, study for boards, take care of a wife, and keep my golf game going. Around about 1964 or 1965, we began to realize it was time to move on. We liked the idea of New Rochelle, which was very convenient to the Bronx. And after a lot of shopping around, we found an area that was just being built up. We were the first ones in the development and picked the lot. We built the house ourselves, from the forestry right up to the house. We had a lot of fun doing it and a lot of aggravation. Our builders went bankrupt before the house was finished. We became the builders ourselves. Marilyn became the general contractor. At one time, in the middle of February, the workmen walked off the job because the bills had not been paid. Our house had just been taped and it was cold. The tape would have been spoiled, so we managed to sneak a plumber in the middle of the night to turn on the heat so that we could save the house. Orthopedic practice for me and for Joe Alba was sort of a general practice in orthopedics.
Josephine Keyhart.
There were specialists in orthopedics in those days who only did hands or feet or spines, but we were both general orthopedic doctors who handled all kinds of problems and every problem. I kind of like that. Earlier in my training, I had some thoughts about going on to one of these subspecialties, but decided that I really wanted to get into practice and deal with a wide assortment of different people. This is Mr. E.
Als het warm, als het koud, als we gewin jong, als we schön alt. De jonge is de Frühling, de alte is de Winter. De jonge geht gleich auf den Weg, der alte spart sich unter. De jonge wie Astronen gleich hinausgezogen, der alte ist verzornt, in zwei eingebeugen. De jonge fängt an, der alte lässt aus. Der Lebensdrama ist ein Spielchen, wie eine Katz mit der Maus.
Very good. Can you do that in English?
No.
Okay, you can get dressed and go home. I hope you feel better.
Okay, dank, sei gesund.
So long. Sei gesund.
Okay.
Very good. So long. Thank you very much for that lovely poem. It was always a very gratifying business. I loved it every day of my life, and I still do. I'm still busy practicing and hope that I'll be able to practice indefinitely.
Since 1974, when I came here as a first-year resident. One of the first attendings I met was Mel Manin, and I was forewarned that he was a tough guy and he was given a name. and that name was El Diablo. I couldn't understand why they used to call him El Diablo until I met him. As he walked in with his devilish beard and mustache, I said, that name seems to fit. And then, when he started talking and picking on the residents, I said, they named him appropriately. And I'll never forget in one of my first operations when he reamed me out for grabbing the skin with some forceps. I said, well, this man is El Diablo. But in retrospect, he was one of perhaps the best surgeons I've ever seen, technical surgeons I've ever seen. I learned a lot from him. If there was ever a difficult case to do, or a case where you had to think on your feet, and the case that comes to mind is when we had to replace a knee that was completely eaten up with tumor. You had to make up the operation, and there was only one guy in our whole department that could do that, and that was Martin Manin.
There's so many gratifying moments in practicing medicine. There's so many things that happen that it's hard to single out any specific things. But I think that probably what I enjoyed the most was the fact that I was able to do something for Israel. In 1968, I spent a month at the Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, where I had the very good fortune to be able to go out and work in the Arab hospitals in Bethlehem, Hebron, in the old walled city, where I was very busy operating on the Arab kids who had a severe polio epidemic at that time. And I remember being so angry because the polio vaccine was available then, but the Arabs, for their own political reasons, and because it was an Israeli vaccine, refused to give it to their children. Marilyn came over to stay with me for a couple of weeks. And one day when we were up at Masada, we saw Israeli warplanes zooming over the Dead Sea toward Jordan. And we found out at that time that the Israeli army was trying to kill Yasser Arafat. In those days, he was called Abu Amir. Obviously, he escaped because he's still quite alive. And I remember that the Israelis had 70 wounded soldiers during that attack into Jordan. I immediately had to leave Masada and go back to Jerusalem, where I got very busy trying to treat some of these wounded soldiers. Aside from the practice of medicine, however, one of my interests and one of my great joys in life has always been to learn new things. So that as a result, I became a dabbler in various other activities.
It's mind-boggling how many things he's been into.
We've gone from sculpting to painting to music to flying real airplanes to building model airplanes to computers to golf has always been in there. That's never been an option.
Piano.
Piano, of course, we'd like to forget piano, but that one is embedded too deeply into the bedrock of our family already.
And when he gets interested in something, it's an in-depth interest. And it becomes like such a focal point in his life. He has also tried painting, sculpting. Believe it or not, his first piece of sculpture was so lovely and so anatomically correct and just terrific. But he felt that he didn't have the creative instinct. He just didn't have the muse. He has gone into aviation. He's flown his own plane. And just the studying alone for that, you have to give him a tremendous amount of credit. Of course, I hated that only because of the danger involved. I was really frightened, and I would never, ever go in the plane, which was a really point of antagonism between us because he felt he wanted me to go with him.
Always a little angry at a lot of the political stupidities that went on in our world, and did a lot of letter writing. I have 4 letters published in Letters to the Editor of the New York Times. I expect that's close to a world record. And perhaps I ought to get into the Guinness Book of Records for that.
He started taking guitar lessons, and he subsequently left the guitar and went to piano, so we'll talk about his music lessons. The man is a wonderful technician. He can play, he can strum, he's technically terrific. Truthfully, the man has no musical ear or ability or rhythm or sound, but I have to give him credit for trying, and he works real hard. I think of all his hobbies, the music hobbies have been the least successful from my point of view, because I really have to listen to them all the time.
When he got into that guitar, it was just, I think it was years of just the same kind of chord progressions coming out of that.
Yeah, and in fact, I still can't get to sleep until I hear the ticking of a metronome in the background, keeping Dad's beat. It was just a horrible, scary.
He never had any music teachers that would just teach him to play a song. He couldn't just ever play a song, sing-along song. It was always some kind of scale-based learning kind of, because that's what he wants to do. He's
Well, to this day, I have no respect for music teachers, because not one of them told my father that perhaps he should just find another hobby.
I'm now into my third year of piano lessons, where I consider myself to be very interested, very excited to learn about it, but without any talent. I bang away making notes and not music, but I like it, and I'm having a good time doing it. My teacher is able to explain the structure of the music to me. I love to understand how it's put together and how the chords modulate from one key to another. I like that. I enjoy it, but I just can't do it, and I'm not going to play for this tape.
Right. D. C. Right. Having mastered everything about orthopedic surgery, our friend Mel here is now undertaking the mastery of yet another skill.
Which I will never master.
Well, we have hopes if we both live long enough. That's the piano. And Mel has found that there are just as many problems in the piano as there are in the study of the anatomy.
No, anatomy was easy.
Anatomy was easy, okay. Well, what we're trying to do is not make a great pianist out of Mel, but we're trying to teach him the elements and the fundamentals of music, as well as, of course, a certain amount of facility in playing it. We're dealing with a superior intellect, but a somewhat deficient facility.
Talent, it's called.
No, facility. No, by that, no facility, Mel. I mean facility.
In 1972 or thereabouts, we joined the Bonnie Briar Country Club. At that time, it was a restricted golf club. No Jews were allowed to be members. We were one of the first Jewish families, and I was very active trying to break that restriction down, and we eventually did. We now have a very nice mixed club. Golf, of course, as I said, has been very important to me. I spend many hours thinking about it every day or a few times each round. I'm sure I've got the swing figured out. I'm sure that each time I play, that this is the day that everything's going to come together. But of course, it never does.
Every time I see him, which currently is not as often as we'd like, his first line to me is almost inevitably, "I've got a new swing. I'm really excited. I'm hitting the ball better than ever."
It's the Australian swing.
Now it's the Australian swing. Now it's before that it's the perfect golf by whatever his name is. But it's always some new enthusiasm for some new swing.
Of course, he's a great golfer and he lives golf since before we are married. There is not a day that goes by that he doesn't think about the swing, try out the swing, change the swing, test the swing, and in general, swing.
Here I am now in my 68th year, and in thinking back about what's important in life, you come to the conclusion that the only good thing about getting old is having grandchildren. Sam has presented me with Matthew, Michael, and Hillary. And then a year and a half ago, on Christmas Day, the same day on which his father was born, Stephen presented me with Harrison. I now have 4 grandchildren. This is not enough. I want a lot more.
Yeah, I'm telling you, Dad. I think that you might have to settle for 4.
4 is not a bad number.
Could be worse.
Not a bad number.
Maybe you'll get surprised by another one, but don't start thinking about big numbers. The funniest thing about my father being a grandfather is, you've got this very urbane, intellectual, mellow kind of man, and he spends most of his time that I could see with the grandchildren who are just learning how to talk, talking baby talk to them, saying, "Come on, say grandpa, grandpa." And I got quite a kick out of seeing my father, that side of my father.
I know Matthew, my oldest, loves having Grandpa come over to visit, because every time Grandpa comes, he's going to learn a new magic trick, or he's going to learn a new shadow figure. Things that nobody else teaches him. It's really a special thing, to Matthew, that these are things that only Grandpa Mel, can teach him, and he really loves, those times together.
I think the experience of parenthood, although it can be wonderful and thrilling and uplifting, can also be depressing and aggravating for both parents. And if you used a scale of justice as an analogy and you put all the pleasures and good things on one side and all the aggravations and problems on another, bringing up kids, you'd have it very often weighted this way. But when it comes to grandfatherhood, it has to go completely the other way, because there's only pure joy in grandparenthood. And for Mel, it's been wonderful.
Right now, my life is a lot different than it was in my early days. I've eliminated most of the surgery that I do. For the last couple of years, I've only operated 1 day a week at one of the city hospitals, where I teach the residents 1 day a week, and we operate on the clinic patients. This is probably the most fun that I've had in many years. Teaching and learning new things is a very important part of my life. As I said earlier, I plan to work as long as I can. I enjoy what I'm doing. I like the feeling of being able to help other people, to be a constructive member of society, and be able to contribute something to our society. If I had to give advice to future generations who may be looking at this tape, I would say, keep your mind open. Try to learn something new every day. And as a motto, and perhaps even for my epitaph, I would say, straight is good. And I'm not just talking about the flight of a golf ball. Thank you, and good night, Chet.